What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to yet another edition of the Action Network Gambler's Guide. Today, we are talking about how to bet the NFL preseason. I'm your host, Dane Martinez, and with me once again are my two guys, Chris Raybon and Sean Koerner. How you guys doing? This is a little bit of calm before the storm, but that doesn't mean there's not an edge to be had. How you guys doing?
Feeling good, man. I mean, we got 3 days into the Hall of
Yes.
Fame game. It finally feels like football's back. People starting to talk about Madden and stuff again. So it's that time of year.
All right, so let me ask you guys though, and Sean, I'll start with you. Let's get the elephant out of the room, because yeah, sure, Madden ratings, maybe NFL or fantasy football draft season. But for a lot of people, they have not really dove in with both feet just yet into the NFL. So let's talk about it. I mean, is this like we were joking about, just like the degenerate special? Hell, I'll bet 2 8-year-old girls kickboxing. But the question is there really an edge to be had here?
Yeah, and I mean, don't get me wrong. I used to think only degenerates bet the preseason, and I'm a degenerate myself, so
Sure.
I wouldn't fault anybody. But I started
You
to
gave
take
me
it
the lean on those 8-year-old kickboxing girls.
exactly. But last year was the first time I really just dove in. You said 2 feet. I just went all in when it comes to betting on preseason because I'm already projecting all the players for DFS and player props
Right.
anyway. That I realize I have a really good handle on all the information. That's honestly the biggest edge when it comes to preseason is it's so hard to get information. So if you have it and you know when certain players are playing or when they're going to be playing their starters, you can use that to your advantage. So I found that there was a massive edge in preseason betting either before the game or in game. So yeah, going into this season, I am all in on preseason betting.
Hey, Chris, what about you? One of the things Sean mentioned was this idea of he was already doing this work in the DFS world. And I know there are edges to be had in the DFS world when you talk to beat writers and you look at snap counts. But what do you think? Is there an edge to be had here in August?
Yeah, I think there absolutely is, Dane, and it's because of what Sean alluded to, like the information. It's out there, but it's different kind of information than I think you need in the regular season. You really do need to be plugged into these team beat right reports and these team practice reports, and you really need to understand, who's the second team, who's the third team on the depth chart, who do they want to see more of, who has been standing out in practice. That's not to say he is going to have success in the game, but he's going to at least get more snaps. And that, it's a lot of knowing who's going to play. And then it's also, I think, unlike the regular season, I think it's a little more about picking your spots. I think there are certain trends that are important where like you have to understand a coach like John Harbaugh, for example, with the Ravens.
Right.
He tends to approach preseason a little bit differently than most other coaches. So, I personally think the Baltimore Ravens in the preseason is the best bet in sports. They're 40-12 under Harbaugh, 77% straight up. They're 36-15 with one push against the spread. That is a 71% cover rate against the spread. And since 2016, they're 20-0 straight up in the preseason and 17-2-1 against the spread. So like my preseason, like while there's a lot of edges to be had, that's one of the things that like I'm paying more attention to, whereas like I'm not a big trends guy. Like I'm aware of trends, but I always think you have to handicap. Whereas here, there are certain things that we get such a small sample of preseason games each year. There's only 3 that once you have a certain coach who has built up a sample of 52 games, you can really start to understand how he's going to approach that. And also there's another edge comes from the fact that I think the information between you and the books is a little more on equal footing, right?
Yes.
Like the books is kind of like props, certain props they're putting out and they're not spending as much time on it. And I think that's kind of the same thing with the preseason. There's just not enough information to fully model and spend as much time on it. So I would say people like Sean and I are probably spending even more time than the books are with a lot of this information. And that's why I think there's an edge to be had.
It's interesting. You guys talk about being on even footing with the books. I remember in years past with the introduction of the AAF and the XFL, we also thought about kind of being on even footing with the books themselves. And then it comes down to the information. You guys are both talking about the information. So Sean, talk to me, like what are the kinds of information that you're looking for? Is it snap count? Is it what position battles are going on? Is it if a coach is really going to be aggressive and try to win because he's a new first-year head coach? Like, what are the kinds of information that you are looking for, whether it be from beat reporters or anybody else?
Yeah, so it's all the above. I mean, again, I'm projecting every player, how long they'll play, when they'll play, which comes in handy for in-game betting. We could get to that later. But a perfect example of a bet last year that I made was, the Panthers were having their dress rehearsal in week 3, which is now the last week of the preseason. So I knew they were going to play their entire starting lineup for the first half, for the entire first half. And the Steelers, since they played in the Hall of Fame game, it was more of just the scrub bowl where they rested all their starters and they had all the backups that were on the roster bubble playing the game. So I took the Panthers -3.5 for the first half. I know, Sam Darnold's not good, but going up against third stringers and fourth stringers, he's not bad. So they covered easily. It was 17-0. I think they missed out on like another touchdown. They went for it on 4th and goal or something. So it was a blowout, but that was just an example of two teams having a completely different approach to the game just based on scheduling. So just being aware of that and knowing when and where to attack, that's where I think you get the biggest edge.
Yeah, knowing the intent and the objective of the team, right? Sometimes it's not just to win. Sometimes it's to get a long, hard look at certain guys because they have to make their decision as they get down to 53. I mean, Chris, one of the things that Sean mentioned is the quote unquote dress rehearsal. And I wanted to ask you about that. It used to be, hey, the third preseason game, we're going to see these starters, for a full half. Is that really still the case? I mean, there's a lot of coaches now that are kind of eschewing that, even for something like the joint practices that happen earlier on in the kind of training camp schedule. So Chris, are you still looking at like week 3 as different than the other weeks?
No, it's a case-by-case basis because, and this is why you have to, I think, your question to Sean was, what kind of information are you looking for? I think keeping up with beat reports is key because for what's going to happen is nowadays with, there being such access to information is a beat reporter, there's going to be a report on a practice every day. So every day of training camp, there's a new article coming out from at least one, but it's usually many. Almost all the beat reporters are doing a day-by-day count. And if you can kind of keep up with those, then they're gonna have access to coaches. They're gonna talk to coaches. They're gonna talk to position coaches, and because sometimes it's not the head coach that's gonna decide playing time. And
right, it's like the
sometimes
position
it's
group coach.
Yeah, it might be the wide receivers coach wants to see 2 guys, and so they're gonna play more. But the point is, if you kind of keep up with this stuff, you start to understand, okay, who's practicing with the 1s, the 2s, the 3s. You understand who, you're hearing what the coaches are saying, and that's how you know what their plans are going to be. Because coaches are, the media, first of all, they kind of know that there is this niche crowd now that bets on the preseason, that plays DFS. Right. So they're starting to ask the right questions and ask about playing time and, how long are we going to expect the starters to go and, who's going to be playing in the 4th quarter. And so, because it's preseason and it's pretty low stakes, the coaches generally are a little bit more forthcoming about this kind of information. It's just a little more obscure information that you have to sometimes dig for. Like you're not just going to see it like on the front page of NFL.com or even ActionNetwork.com. So I think, that's really the key. It's every coach is going to treat it different. Some coaches like Sean McVay, he may not play his starters a snap all preseason. Some coaches, especially, newer coaches, maybe coaches with younger teams, they want to see those guys. And so they are going to treat it like a true dress rehearsal. And even then, it's like the dress rehearsal used to be, you go into the 3rd quarter. Now, a lot of times you're playing to the half. So you really have to know that, especially with the quarterbacks, because quarterbacks passing such a big component of how a game unfolds, that you kind of really, if anything, you want to nail down that quarterback rotation first and foremost. And I think you get that information from following the practice reports and the beat reports.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we're talking about the 3rd and 4th string safety who may get a swing tackle job when they're going up against an actual number 1 edge rusher, these are the mismatches that you may want to exploit, whether it be in DFS or betting the NFL preseason. That's why we're giving it to you here right now. The Gambler's Guide to Betting the NFL Preseason. Dane Martinez, Chris Raybon, and of course, Sean Koerner. Now, you're talking about these different sources of information, not even on ActionNetwork.com. So I got to ask you guys, where are you finding this, Sean? I want to start with you. Like, what teams have you found, or beat reporters that you have found, where you may be able to get this kind of information? Like, who should I be tailing from what random beat writer on, say, the Panthers or some other team that I don't even really follow?
Yeah, it's a case by case basis. I would recommend having Twitter lists. I follow a few Twitter lists. I believe I have my own too, but you just want the most up to date beat reporters for every team. The Athletic does a great job of breaking down. Every day there's practice, and they kind of report on what, like Raybon mentioned, what they're going to try to accomplish in their upcoming preseason game. So you get a bunch of clues from that. But I'm tracking everything on a team by team basis. I mean, I already told you I'm making projections. So I have notes on everybody. I'm tracking all of this stuff, but the easiest way really is Twitter, specifically making a list for preseason, just because there is so much you have to sift through. There's a ton. So just, having an up-to-date, fresh Twitter list is the best way to go.
Same for you, Chris. You just, kind of making a list, following beat reporters, getting as much information as you can from the people that are closest to the practices themselves.
Yeah, I think, I do a Twitter list where I add any beat reporter of a team that I come across. I pretty much add, like, and not even based on, I mean, I don't really know any poor quality beat reporters, or at least off the top of my head. So it's like, I'm not looking like, oh, well, I only want this Saints guy and not that other Saints guy. Like, anyone that I know or come across, I'm adding them, I'm following them, I'm throwing them in a list. And then as Sean mentioned, the Athletic, I love what they do there. They go really in depth with their articles. So like they'll give you stats sometimes of like what the quarterbacks are doing in each practice, and then they'll tell you kind of like, who's standing out, who's not, what the coaches are saying. So I think they do a great job. ESPN, NFL Nation, they usually have a beat writer assigned to every team, and they're talking about what's happening in camp. So I follow, I read that as well. I think Reddit sometimes can be a good source of information for things, some, depending on, if it's not like a mainstream necessarily like an Athletic or ESPN, but some other beat writer has something good that will pop up on Reddit a lot of the time. So those are my three big ones. But yeah, I'm like reading, it's more than just Twitter. It's like reading tweets is one thing, but like I like something like the Athletic or ESPN because I can read whole articles and really kind of get into it. Tweets, you're kind of at the mercy of who's tweeting what when. So while I do look at that, and that's an easy way to kind of have it at a bird's eye view, I really like to dig in and leave enough time every day to kind of keep up with the articles for all 32 teams and spend some time on that. So you spend an hour on that every day, and that kind of adds up. And, to Sean's point, kind of knowing all the players, looking depth charts are another key piece of information I should mention too, because again, you're not going to see much from the first stringer. So, certain teams are going to be a lot deeper than others. And if you have a good second team, a good third team, that's a lot more important. And so just kind of knowing those depth charts and who's even on those teams is pretty important as well.
All right, so let's spin it forward, guys. We've got football this week, or maybe we can call it football. We'll see about that. We've got the Jaguars. They're 1.5-point favorites against the Vegas Raiders. The total for this game at this point is 32.5. That is down a point from 33.5. Ironically, that total going through the number of 33. I mean, is there anything we're looking for in this game? My kind of conventional wisdom is to kind of lean under. These guys have only had maybe a week of practice so far. I don't know if the timing is right. I don't know if they're doing anything that is, more impressive than their base vanilla defense. We're not going to see any double A gap blitzes right now. You know what I mean? So what are you thinking about as we actually put the ball in the air in Canton, Ohio this week? Sean, I'll start with you.
Well, this game, I'm going to wait for information, but I'm assuming the Raiders won't be playing Derek Carr, Josh Jacobs, Devontae Adams. They're too established. We already know what they are at this point in their career. Whereas the Jaguars, they probably do want to get Trevor Lawrence some reps here. Travis Etienne, possibly, if he's healthy enough to suit up. Christian Kirk, I mean, they're brand new, expensive wide receiver. They're going to want to get him reps. So if we have the Jaguars' first string offense going up against backups, I would be interested in taking the Jaguars in, say, the first quarter, first half, depending on the discrepancy. But that's something that I'll wait. Once we have a better idea, I'll wait on that. And then, like you said, the under for the Hall of Fame game, it's always pretty low scoring because you're going to see more backups. But the total reflects that. I think it's down to like 32.5 or something. Yeah. I do like to take my spots with the total in game. Typically when they poll the starters, a good example is last year when Raybon and I were at the 49ers versus the Chargers. I said once they pull Trey Lance, it's going to be Nate Sudfeld versus Easton Stick. I'm all over the under, and we saw Nate Sudfeld warming up in the sideline, so I figured that this is Trey Lance's last drive. So I hammered the under in game. We were there in person, and there was 0 points scored in the last like 20 minutes of the game. So there are spots where, you want to take advantage of the under, but the Hall of Fame game, we already know it's going to be a bunch of scrubs, so the total's already very low.
Yeah, interesting. I will say this though: pick sixes and fumble, scoop, and scores do count against the under when you go with that strategy. So, like you said, Sean, you got to pick your spots. Hey, Chris, what about you? What do you think for this Hall of Fame game? Sean mentioned the idea of Trevor Lawrence trying to get those reps, some of the new members or returning members of the Jags, but there's also a new head coach there in Jacksonville. So, could that be yet another reason to try to get more reps against competition? What do you say there, Chris?
Yeah, really, there's new coaches on both teams, so but I do think the Jaguars, like to your point, they're a younger team, and I think that you will see them play more of their prominent players longer than the Raiders do, if the Raiders do at all. So I do lean the Jaguars in this spot, and looking at, Doug Peterson, you can't really glean much from their records. He's 8-8 in the preseason against the spread. McDaniels is 3-5. I think McDaniels, coming from that New England, frame of mind, I don't think he's gonna. I think he's gonna be more looking at specific things, and I think he's gonna be playing guys who, I just don't think the Raiders are gonna go as hard as what I'm trying to say. So, but I will say this: here's really the edge here, because again, you got to kind of know. It comes down to like quarterbacks are always going to play a big part here. And this is a game where we might see the 4-string quarterbacks for these teams, and the Jaguars, they just signed Kyle Slaughter. And if you follow the NFL preseason, you know that Kyle Slaughter is like the GOAT of NFL preseason. He averages 8.1 yards per attempt in his preseason career, 11 touchdowns, 1 pick. And if the Raiders played their 4-string, it would be Chase Garber, as a 2022 undrafted free agent out of Cal. So I think the Jags have an edge there, even down to the 4-string. So I like the Jags for all those reasons. And then as far as the total, this game fits a trend. So when we see the total drop, and it opened at 33.5, it's dropped all the way to 30.5. And I think that's because you are going to see a lot of, 3rd and 4th stringers. It's in the Hall of Fame game. It's the only game where, the only teams that have 4 preseason games. So I think that in this spot, the under is the play. If we go back, we've seen unders that drop by 2 or more points in the preseason since 2004 go 59, 44, and 3. That is a 57% hit rate. And again, this Hall of Fame game does fit that trend.
All right, fair enough. Now, let me get you out of here, guys, on this. Here's 1 or 2 things I'm looking at for the 2022 NFL preseason. I want you guys to react to them and then tell me if there's any other kind of leans, any other nuggets that we should be aware of as this preseason commences here in August. The first for me, I always like to fade whatever team is on Hard Knocks, okay? You talk about like the information, the access. Well, the entire public is getting all sorts of access into the biting kneecaps that are going to be going on into Detroit, and start to then get invested in those very 2nd, 3rd, 4th stringers that are going to be playing their hind parts off in the second half of a 3rd preseason game. But just because we have that kind of, soundtrack behind it doesn't mean they're actually any better. So I like to fade the team that the public has incredible access to. And then I also think about some of the teams that will have players under suspension. Okay, whether that's the New Orleans Saints, potentially with Alvin Kamara, whether that's the Cleveland Browns, we know Deshaun Watson now has 6 games that may change a little bit. And we're going to get them playing in preseason, but the teams are going to manage their reps slightly differently. Do you consider any of those things? And Chris, do you have any other kind of leans or things we should be looking for, if it's not the things my knee-jerk reactions are?
Yeah, I think that's interesting, talking about fading the team on Hard Knocks. I don't have the data on, like, I would actually like to look at that, like the ATS records of those teams, because I think that could be an angle I just can't speak on. Like, I don't have the data to speak on it. But I will say, in general, like, I think, we mentioned that a lot of the information you're getting, it's kind of obscure, and it's like, I think if a line, like the thing you have to remember is like no one knows that much. Like even us, like there's still going to be such a lot of volatility and a lot of variance in our projections for the preseason. I mean, the scores are lower. Like the average total is in like the low 30s. Most of the spreads are not going to be higher than they're probably not going to go higher than a touchdown. And most of them are going to be in that field goal range or lower. So it's a lot of. I think there's always going to be value on kind of fading the public, and we have that information in the Action Network app, where the money is going for the total and for the spread. So I think looking at that and kind of being contrarian there. But there's also an interesting one that I've found is like when you get big underdogs, 5.5 points or more in the preseason, they've been very profitable, and it's especially true when these are like non-conference matchups, because there's really like no familiarity there. These teams are probably just they're kind of like they're not playing to beat each other as much as they're trying to get looks at different things. They probably had joint practices, right? So we've seen that since 2004. It doesn't happen too often, but when you have like an underdog by 5.5 points or more in non-conference preseason play, 46 and 30, 61%. So still a decent sample, 76 games. It doesn't happen too often, but there's always a few spots each preseason when you can kind of go and bet on that. So like that one, like when the totals drop, and again, always banging the Baltimore Ravens. That's always what I'm doing in the preseason.
Fair enough, Sean. What about you? Any kind of trends or nuggets that we should be following when it comes to the preseason? Am I crazy? Maybe backing the Browns because Jacoby Brissett may actually get some reps?
Yeah, no, I like your Hard Knocks take. Similar to Raybon, I'll have to look into that. But certainly, whenever you have a situation like that, the public might back a team like that.
Romanticizing the same information.
Yeah, and it might inflate the number. Again, I'm only going to take a number if I agree with the playing time, and things like that. But I do like that angle. Same thing with suspended players. DeAndre Hopkins probably wouldn't play much in the preseason otherwise, but with this season, he's going to be out the first 6 games. Maybe they get a more run. Again, I'm going to treat that on a case-by-case basis. So I'll just give a high-level nugget. Again, this is more for in-game betting. And I know we talked about on our last pod about how we like to bet in-game based on, the game flow. If a team's trailing by a ton, they're going to throw more, things like that. Throw that out the window.
Not in preseason.
Because they don't care. They don't really care about winning or losing. So if a team's up by 2 touchdowns, doesn't mean they're going to run the ball as much. It's going to be pretty straight up. So just keeping that in mind as well. But again, when it comes to game flow and like when players are going to be in or out, it changes on every game. So I'm going to treat every game completely different.
No, thanks a lot, guys. And I think the main point here is what we are trying to ascertain. The information we're trying to get here is what is the true objective of those teams. That's why you can throw game flow out the window when these guys need to make decisions on getting to 53, and they don't really care if they win the game by 4.5 points. Well, that about do it for us. This has been another edition of the Gambler's Guide here on the Action Network. I'm Dane Martinez, the Spittin' Statistician. For my guys, Chris Raybon and Sean Koerner, of course, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube of Action Network, download the Action Network app, unless, of course, you are allergic to money. We'll see you next time, guys.